Oh my
Succeeded.
God. Nobody
Okay,
wants
we're
to
going.
open that up on the plane.
All right, we're live.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday, December 17th, West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board. Thank you all for joining us. We do have Brian from the city here, legal. And before we do that, we need to take a quick roll call. We do have a quorum at this point. So Tori, would you mind just jumping in and doing a quick roll call, please?
Yep, happy to do that. Jeff Miller,
Here, thank you.
Mark May,
Here.
Thomas Kreuzer, President John Hannum.
Here.
Justin Lindeman.
Here.
Jeremy Mackey.
Here.
Ashley Moray. Absent Samantha Ross. Absent Mark Smith. Absent Jason Statz.
Here.
Oh, quorum.
Great, thank you, Tori. So moving through the agenda before we get into legal conversations here, has everyone had an opportunity to look at the agenda? And if so, would entertain a motion?
I motion to approve and move forward.
Second.
Thank you. First by Jeremy, second by Mark. Any further discussion? Without hearing any, all in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. Moving down the agenda to last month's minutes. Has anyone had an opportunity to review? If so, would entertain a motion for that as well.
Move to
I'll
approve.
entertain a motion for that as well.
Second.
Okay. Same order, I suppose. Jeremy with a motion, Mark with a second. Any further discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. So with that, we're going to move on down to Brian with the city legal department. Going to talk to us a little bit about records, ethics, public meetings, and that sort of thing. So with that, Tori, unless you want to do a introduction of sorts, I can turn it over to you or Brian.
I'll jump in there, Tori. Good morning. My name is Brian Moose. I know I've met a few of you all before at one of these public records ethics trainings. I'm an assistant city attorney. I've been with the city for about 5 years, and I represent the urban development department, various boards that operate under the urban development department, finance, procurement. And I'm here to spend a few minutes with you today. I know Tori put it down for 45, but it's more like 20 minutes. We're going to go through public meetings, what they are, public records, how to control and keep your eye out for those, and ethical considerations that as board members you should take into account. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation, so let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen, and let's get started.
Really quickly, Brian, before you get started, your mic sounds a bit off. I don't know if it's through your headphones or if it's your computer.
Meaning it's not loud enough? Or...
I don't know, you guys hear okay?
Yeah, it's kind of muddy.
Yeah.
I can see if I can switch over just to computer audio, but I don't know how that's going to work at this point. So it's muffled or just not great?
That was
Brian,
a little better.
Yeah, I think if you just elevate your just speak up a little bit, it'd be better. Thank you.
No problem. There we go. First thing we're going to discuss today is public meetings. What is a public meeting, and how does it affect the actions that this board takes? In Oregon, and really across the United States, it's the intent of government to ensure that governing bodies make their decisions and deliberations in an open forum so that the public may participate. We provide agendas, times, dates, so that the public can participate and see doing. Sometimes, called like sunshine meetings so that people in the public are aware of the actions and deliberations. Purpose of Oregon public meeting laws. It's to ensure that meetings of government bodies, which decisions are made about public business, are open to the public. They have notice, they know when it's going to be, they've got access, whether it's online or in person, or if it's a hybrid, both. And then it's accessible to all members of the public who wish to participate. Well, what government bodies or entities are subject to having public meetings that are open? Well, it applies to all meetings of a governing body, of a public body, for which a quorum is required. And we discussed that earlier. You have to have a certain number of folks present to ensure that we've got a quorum. Make decisions or deliberate towards the decision on any matter. Well, in this case, a public body is a city, county, or other subdivision of the state. And the governing body would be, well, in this case, West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board. A governing body means two or more members of a public body that have the authority to make decisions or recommendations to a public body on policy or administration. Well, in this case, two or more members, we need a quorum, so I believe it's 6 members that have the authority to make decisions or recommendations. Governing body for the city includes not only the council, but all boards, commissions, such as Downtown Advisory Board and West Rad. Well, what meetings are subject to the law? What happens if 2 of y'all go out for a beer after work? Well, a meeting is the convening of a governing body, which has a quorum, to make a decision and deliberate towards a decision on any matter. Public meeting laws apply to a meeting, even if the sole purpose of the meeting is to gather information and not make a decision at that time. Well, if West Rab was going to go look at a piece of property or a building, and you guys did it as a group, well, that would be a public meeting. West Rab's going to go look, we could have an agenda item where the West Rab's going to go view a parcel of property or a building. That could be a public meeting if it's done with a quorum number of members. You're not deliberating, you're not making any decisions, you're gathering information, but that would still apply. It's not a public meeting, well, less than a quorum. If you guys go out to lunch, or on-site inspections, that wouldn't necessarily qualify. Executive sessions really doesn't come to apply to West Rab, but generally, executive sessions are for specific purposes that it will exclude members of the public, so that certain deliberations can take place. Generally, if, like, for example, council is contemplating purchasing or placing an offer on a piece of property, or if they're selling that piece of property, they want to be able to, gather information and discuss information, discuss with their lawyers what a fair offer would be. If that was open to the public and, council was going to put an offer on a building for $1 million, and it was known to the public, the seller would have an advantage. That would be, it wouldn't be a fair playing field if we couldn't deliberate behind closed doors in certain circumstances. News media may attend executive sessions, but they have an obligation to not disclose executive session information, because that would defeat the very purpose of it. Media is only allowed to report on general subjects, real estate deliberations, but surprisingly or not, there's no punishment for media who violate the law. I'm not aware of many situations where the media has gone out after an executive session and spilled the beans on exactly what was discussed. Here's where issues arise, and they're real world issues regarding public meetings and violations. Pitfalls, the most common problems that boards have when they violate the public meeting laws is they'll all jump on a conference call or send an email to the group. Those type of situations, if they're not properly noticed and available and open to the public, could violate the open meeting law. You could have a quorum of folks on a conference call and then start discussing what could be board deliberations at a public meeting, but doing it behind closed doors. Text messages, instant messages, those all could turn into public meeting violations if you're not careful. In fact, Dundee v. Handy is a recent case that resulted in an investigation of a public board commission in this case. And they were found to have violated the public meeting laws through serial meetings that occurred via email. So, example of that is, say, if Jeff said, "Hey, what do you think about X, Y, and Z?" and then forwards it to Jeremy. Jeremy adds his 2 cents and forwards it on to the next board member, and then the next. So you would have had deliberations from each board member, but done in a silo. But when you look at the whole communication as a whole, the board or commission would have conducted deliberations outside of a public meeting venue. The part you should be wary about when it comes to public meetings law violations, in this particular instance, the individuals, board members, were found to have violated the public meeting laws, which does have some teeth. And they were found to have $20,000 in personal liability, and the county also got dinged as well. In this case, if you violate the open meeting laws, the city's not going to cover that. And so you have to be very careful as a public official to not violate the public meeting laws. So careful with your text messages, your emails, and other forms of electronic communication, and ensure that if you're going to have those deliberations, do so at this meeting. Lessons from Dundee: careful what you do with emails. It's easy to hit reply all. It's easy to forward email saying, "Hey, what do you think?" And you're only forwarding it to one board member, but that next board member, may not also think about it and forward it to the next board member. So be very careful about that. You can't deliberate on matters individually and then forward them along. It's not open to the public. The board was a sophisticated board. They were a county board. They knew or should have known better, and they did it anyway. And that's why they were trying, the court found that they were trying to deliberate outside of a public venue almost intentionally. So there was a heavy hand on them for that particular act. And further, hitting reply all is also another way to violate. If you're emailing about administrative issues, availability, things along those lines, that's not deliberations or actions that would lead to a public meeting violation. Hey, Jeff, you email somebody and says, "Hey, are you available on this date?" Or Tori sends out a blanket email to the board and says, "Hey, are you available?" And everyone hits reply all yes. Again, those are just administrative things and will not be violations of public law because there's no deliberations about it. Electronic communications, I throw in a little bit of public records law in here. You're using your personal computer or private email account to conduct public business. It may subject your computer or private email to disclosure under public records law. It could be subpoenaed for litigation. So if you are using your personal device, please note that it could be subject to having a judge or a lawyer look through your personal communications to determine whether those were deliberations or public records. So keep that in mind.
Brian, really quickly, I just have a question on that
Yes.
point. These days, with the cloud-based, so you can have a work computer, or you can have a personal computer where the files aren't, they're not stored or reside on that device. Is it shifting so that they can just petition that storage service?
Well, you'd get, like, for example, the city would get, and say, there was an investigation in the West Rad for a serial email communication or a text message. The public records or the subpoena would come in for those records. Where they're housed is less important. If you use your personal device and send an email and CC'd Tori on that email, well, Tori would have a copy of that public record, and it wouldn't be necessary to look at an individual's personal device because the official record would be held on a government server or a government cloud. So that where it's stored is less important than ensuring that we do have a copy of it. What is a public record? It's any information. It's really broad. Text messages, napkin drawings, anything that's prepared, owned, or used or retained by a state agency or political subdivision that relates to an activity, transaction, or function of the state is necessary to satisfy the fiscal, legal, administrative, or historical policies, requirements, or needs of the political subdivision. We have an obligation to maintain those records. So if you send a text message and it's the only original one and you delete it, you would have violated public records retention schedules. And those are available on our website. Certain things are like voicemails. Those things get deleted immediately. Emails, I believe, are around 2 years unless you archive and keep them. So each type of record has a different period of time that it has to be maintained. Not all public records are maintained indefinitely. Congratulations, you are all public officials when you signed on to be a member of this board. We're going to cover all different things about public officials ethics. Do these ethics laws apply to you all? Yes, you guys are public officials. They also apply to relatives, your spouse, your children, other close relatives. It would apply to gifts that your relatives or your spouse would receive, and any business in which you are associated. So Jeremy, it sounds like you have a business. Well, the ethics laws would apply to your business. If West Rab was going to recommend to the council to purchase X, Y, and Z building, and if Jeremy owned that building, he'd have to be careful and ensure that he's not going to violate any ethics by voting with the board on the sale of this house or this building. So you have to be cognizant of your business relationships and your household relationships. Public official means elected officials like city council, appointed officials like you all, employees and agents. You're a public official even if you don't get paid. What's a business mean in this instance if if ethics are going to apply to your private business? Corporations, partnerships, franchises, self-employment does not include 501c3s if the public official is only a member of the board and does not receive any financial remuneration for their services. There are state law and Salem Revised Code ethical requirements. In general, the city is more restrictive than the state. The state is a little more open compared to the city. The city is more restrictive, and that's the one that's going to apply. We've got conflict of interest, appearance, special favors, and non-disclosure, and we'll go through each of those and how they would apply. Well, we've heard of conflict of interest before. What does it mean? Well, ORS defines actual conflict of interest as any action or decision or recommendation by a person acting in their capacity as a public official, which would be to the private pecuniary benefit or detriment of the person or person's relative or any business which is associated with that person. So they're looking at a pecuniary benefit or detriment. The city is even more restrictive. It's any benefit or detriment. It doesn't just have to be money. It could be a more of a quid pro quo situation, or you're receiving some sort of free advertising. It wouldn't necessarily have to be just money. It's any benefit. Well, if you have a potential conflict of interest, well, if you own, if you're a member of a nonprofit and that nonprofit is, you're a non-voting member of that nonprofit, you'd want to, mention that because it looks like there may be a conflict, but you don't control the nonprofit. You're just a member. Against any action or decision or recommendation by a person acting in a capacity as a public official, which could be a private financial benefit or detriment. That's state law. SRC, again, is more restrictive. It's any benefit or detriment. So city's more restrictive. Well, what happens if you have an actual or a potential conflict of interest? What do you do? Well, if you have an actual conflict of interest, disclose it. Say, hey, I'm selling this, we're considering selling this building to the city. It's my building. It's an actual conflict of interest. I'm going to refrain from discussing or voting on this particular issue because it's an actual conflict of interest. You can't just abstain. You have to refrain. There is some exceptions if there's necessity, but with a large board like this, generally it does not ever come up. We remove that exemption because we have large size boards. If it's a potential conflict of interest, because there's a lot of gray area in these conflicts of interest. Well, if you're not sure, it's always best to say, hey, I'm part of a nonprofit that wants to sell this building to the city. I just want everyone to know so that everyone's aware, and then you can participate. The city gets a little more restrictive depending on how gray or how much of a conflict it looks like. We've got an appearance of impropriety rule. If it doesn't look great in the eyes of the general public, you definitely might want to say, hey, this is. It appears that I may have that actual conflict, so I'm going to go ahead and refrain from participating, and that's the safest route. Appearance of impropriety, public officials are bound to observe in their official acts the highest standards of morality and to discharge faithfully the duties of their office, regardless of personal consideration. Their conduct in both their official and private affairs should be above reproach. We want to ensure that the city of Salem public officials are engaging in activities that the public is not going to look at and say, well, that smells funny. We want to avoid that at all costs. We have to ensure that we fairly and impartially fulfill our duties as a public official. We can't contact counselors to obtain preferential consideration in connection with city employment. We can't use city-owned property for private use. I don't think West Rab has. I suppose if you had a meeting over at the West Salem Library, set up from, if you had a meeting from 7 to 10 and the meeting was over at 9 and you decided to have a party, that probably would not be a good use of city property. No official shall grant any special privileges to anyone what is available to everybody else. So you can't do favors for certain individuals. What we can't do is disclose confidential information, disclose any confidential city information, or use city confidential information to advance the financial or other private interests of themselves or other. So if West Brad's discussing, hey, we're going to make a recommendation to city council, and then you go and purchase the land so that you can jack up the price and sell it to the city council later or the city later, that would be an improper use of that information. What happens if you're in violation? Well, there could be civil penalties, forfeiture, sanctions. In the city, if you were engaged in a nefarious activity, you could be removed from office, and a broad power that the city council retains is to act accordingly. So there are some other actions that can be taken by city council for violations. Chapter 62 of the Salem Charter applies to elected and appointed officials at public hearings. If you receive gifts, you have relationships or you engage in campaign contributions, you have to disclose that information. If you receive a gift from, $500 tickets to a game from somebody who's looking to purchase a property that West Salem West Rab is going to recommend to the city council, you have to recuse yourself because it would look like a conflict of interest if you're receiving a gift from the seller of a building and then you're going to vote on whether you recommend that city council buy it. We don't want to get in a situation where it looks like we've got a conflict of interest or the appearance of impropriety in the mind of a reasonable person or the reasonable city of Salem resident. Compliance with ethics laws is a personal responsibility. No one's going to go and tell you, hey, I think you have a conflict of interest. They may tell you that, but you have to make that decision on your own. You're obligated to follow both state law and city ethics laws, and the cities are more restrictive. So if you're following the city's ethics laws, you're always going to be in compliance with state law. What is the role of the city attorney's office when it comes to ethical considerations? Our client is the city or the agency. It's not the individual board members. We don't represent public officials in their personal or professional capacity. Back in the Dundee case, those commission members had to retain lawyers at their own expense to defend themselves in that public meetings violation. Part of in the Dundee case, the city attorney provided advice to the board members that what they were doing was okay. And the court said the city officials cannot even rely on an advisory opinion or legal advice from an attorney at the city. So if I gave you legal advice on whether something's ethical or not, you can't even rely on that. You have to make your own independent determination. We were here to help you, guide you through the process and point you in the right direction. But we can't tell you yes or no whether something is, a conflict or not. There are resources available if you run into a situation where you think you may have a conflict of interest. There's the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. You can contact them. They can give you informal advice. They provide advice to boards and commissions all across the state. They've seen many of these issues time and time again. But even obtaining an informal opinion is not going to relieve you of liability. You can't rely on it and say, hey, OJET said it was okay. Courts are going to say that's still not good enough. You can get a staff advisory opinion, which is more of a written, formal determination. But even then, you're not going to be exempt from liability. You have to get a full commission opinion that will exempt you from liability. Those are not issued very often, and they take months and months and months to get a decision on that. And depending on the nature of the conflict, that'll determine whether they will render a commission opinion. Well, a little closer to home, if you think you have a conflict or an issue, we do have a hearings officer at the city who receives and initiates ethics complaints, will hear and investigate those, and render advisory opinions or interpretations. If that is something that is needed, you can contact our city attorney, Dan Hutchinson, and he can put you in contact with our hearing. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. And let's see if I can stop sharing. There. Questions?
Thank you, Brian. I had a quick question, just going back to one of your initial slides there. It mentioned if there's two people, oftentimes, so backing up, two people that are gathered, oftentimes with this group, we find ourselves at a golf tournament or another meeting, West Salem Business Association meeting, luncheon, that type of thing. Not even talking about something, but sometimes that these topics can cross-pollinate a little bit, in that something that is said in general at this meeting might also be shared at the WSBA luncheon or something along those lines. Can you just clarify a little bit? The slide said 2, but then you also mentioned a quorum, which would be 6. If you could just touch on that for clarity, that would be great.
Yes, with why it starts with, or why it indicates 2 is certain, depending on what the bylaws are for a particular board. If you had a 5-member board and the 3 would be constituted as a quorum, and if the bylaw said a majority of the quorum can make a decision, so that you have to have at least 2. So in that situation, depending on your bylaw, so that's why they put that number in there, because it would always be the minimum number of board members that would make a decision. In the case of West Rab, you'd need it's 6 to have a quorum, and then I believe it's the majority of members in attendance, if I remember correctly, which would make it 4 for West Rab. But to the question of gathering at, say, I don't know, SEDCOR or something along those lines, things that will show up in front of West Rab. I mean, you really have, I mean, it's a gray area. You need to make sure that if you're with other board members, that you take an active role, not intentionally trying to discuss stuff that's going to come up at West Rab, or at least indicate to the other board members, please, we've got to be careful. We've got this on the agenda for next month. Let's not discuss it in a fashion that would, you'd be putting on your public officials for West Rab. If there's ancillary, discussions that are not related to what directly related to West Rab actions, then you're probably going to be fine. If West Rab is looking at, recommending, a third bridge or something along those lines, well, those discussions, third bridge would come up all over the place. So you're free to discuss those type of things, but you want to ensure that you're not sitting there going, I think maybe we should recommend to City Council that we, recommend, building a third bridge. So you have to be careful on your discussions to make sure they're not deliberations for the West Rab.
Copy. Thank you. Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, is it a fair clarification on that if there are 6 of these members here dispersed at a large SEDCOR meeting and they're not sitting at the same table, but we're talking about stuff that is this sort of business or could be a conflict of business. If you're not actually meeting at the event, it's not a meeting, right? If you're all sitting at a table discussing the stuff, but if you're dispersed and you don't even know the other people are in the room, just because you're present, I mean, that's not going to trigger a meeting, would you say?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
If you all sat at a table and started discussing stuff, then it's going to look like we've got an impromptu meeting that wasn't properly noticed. Attendance at a conference, you're not going to have any issues there.
Right. And I have actually a follow-up, if I might. When there is a long-term project that could cause a conflict of interest, and the issue could come up at multiple meetings, I'm assuming the conservative approach is to declare the conflict at every single meeting. But I mean, once you're on record at some point, are you on record that you have a conflict? Or I mean, how often do you need to repeat this potential conflict?
Is it a potential conflict or an actual conflict?
Let's say potential, because that's the more broad.
So you're going to have a potential conflict, but you're still allowed to participate. I think the most conservative approach is every time it comes up on the agenda, you say, I've got a potential conflict of interest, so that each time it shows up on the agenda, we've disclosed our potential conflict of interest. So it's to ensure that the public can see that there's not a potential for impropriety, so that each individual, meeting, we've got that disclosure. It's on the record, and you can say, hey, I just disclosed my potential conflict of interest, and then we discuss it.
Great. Thank you, Brian, Mark. Any other questions for Brian before we let him off the hook? Not hearing any. Brian, thank you for joining us this morning. I know it's early, and thank you for enduring the egg topic this morning prior to the meeting.
Hey, you
Thank you,
didn't ask me. You didn't ask me, but I'm a deviled eggs guy.
I was going to ask you, Brian, but I thought, doggone it, it's an attorney. I
No.
got to be careful here.
Yeah, but I gotta say, no bacon in it because I think the texture would just be thrown off with that.
Well, you should try it both ways, and then we'll do another vote.
All right, we'll check in next year.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So with that, we are going to have a really short meeting this morning, which is fantastic in my opinion. I always love short meetings versus long. Going down the list here, we're kind of at the end. And so at this time, we always open it up to hear from people from WSBA or Jason. I know you usually give us an update on what's going on. So with that, let's open that up. And Jason, why don't you start us off?
Great. West Salem Neighborhood Association is now, we just tested meeting in person last month, which was great. Meetings have been shifted to the first Wednesday of each month at 6 p.m. at Roth's. I think there's a discrepancy on the city website right now. Looking into having that corrected, and I believe that we are skipping December and moving on to January. I just got back from a very long trip in New York, and brought back a cold with me. So don't quote me on those meeting times. Please check the city website for official information. And the city has done something really awesome. They've made some easy URLs to access your neighborhood association pages on the city's website. So it's cityofsalem.net/swan or /West Salem, to just kind of make that a little bit easier for users. So just kind of want to put that out there. Edgewater Partners will have a meeting on the 8th, this Thursday in the morning at 9 a.m. It's open to the public. You can access information on Facebook under Edgewater Partners or Salem Leadership Foundation. And that's about all I got.
Thank you, Jason. When you mentioned the neighborhood association, is it a hybrid or is it just strictly in person at this point?
Strictly in person. So, yeah, we've been trying to, there's a real push to want to go back to in person. Roth's has been nice enough to host the group again. So that's also really great.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting back safely from New York, even though it is with a cold. Hopefully you had a good time. It seems like you go to New York on occasion. Last time we were speaking, you had mentioned you were heading that direction, but.
Yeah, I got a handful of cities that I really like to travel to on the regular. And I wanted to see the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. It's kind of on my bucket list. So check, got that one done.
Yeah, good for you. That's awesome. Anyone, Jeremy, I think that you sometimes chime in for WSBA. Anything there that you can report to the group?
Yeah, so the WSBA just did their annual office elections. The board is relatively unchanged. Samantha Ross is still the acting president. Heidi Mackay, my wife, is still the vice president. Corey Tedrow from OSCU, sorry, it's too early. From OSCU, she's the treasurer now. I think that's a new one. But the rest of the board itself remains unchanged. I think a couple people in regular positions are dropping off due to schedule conflicts. But that's kind of the news on that. Still in person. I think it's third Thursdays of the month at Roth's. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. Well, with that, unless there's anything else for the good of the order.
Well, I'll just, if I can mention something, Jeff, if that's okay.
Please. Of course.
So I'm gonna share my screen here really quick. Okay, so really quickly, end of the calendar year, just wanted to go over our calendar. So typically January meetings are canceled, but as I mentioned earlier, the finance department wants to have the boards and commissions recommendations for budget a month earlier. So we'll start talking a little bit higher level budget discussion next month, and then hopefully have a recommendation by February. So this shows the meetings that we had over the last year and some of the topics. I'm happy to email this out if you guys want to take the time when we meet January, the next meeting. If you have any suggestions on, if there's a topic that you found interesting and you want to, maybe a deeper dive and we want to revisit it in multiple meetings, let me know. This is one of those, as far as like the forming of the agenda, Mark, Jeff, and I do have a conversation as far as what the topics could be, but there's an opportunity every meeting for, at the end of the meeting like this one, for you guys to weigh in and say, I'd really like to hear on this topic next month, if that's possible, or even at the time of the meeting when Jeff is going down the agenda and there's the motion to approve the agenda, there's an opportunity if the rest of the group decides to take action and amend the agenda and include a topic. So just letting you know that there's, if there's something in particular you want to hear from and maybe you haven't heard it or you want a little bit more information, let me know and I'm happy to circle around and have that conversation and reflect it on the agenda. But over the last year, like I said, pretty much first of the year's budget, and then we get into progress on projects, some of the more broader community things. The bond was a topic that Jeff mentioned, so that might be something to revisit with West Salem investments and some things there. Happenings in other urban renewal areas. We can invite project managers from the Urban Development Department from downtown or North Gateway to inform the group on what's happening elsewhere. We've had Polk County Commissioner Lyle Mordhurst has come before. We can have others if that's what you want to hear from, and so on. So again, if there's a topic you maybe haven't seen or you want a little bit more information, let me know. Happy to include that.
Thank you, Tori. Speaking of January, looking at last year, we canceled January and July. Since January is next month, did you say that it was canceled, Tori? Or
no, we'll keep it because we have to start the budget discussions. Hopefully,
okay.
December it starts to get to that point where people start to travel, and that's why I mean the ethics and public meetings is important. So if you feel like, given the light attendance that we had today, we could shift that to a different date if you prefer. It's just one of those things. As it gets into December and January, people are moving. It's a little bit harder to have a quorum. But in this case, with January, unless we hear Irma when we start to draft the agenda about 2 weeks before the meeting, we can get a sense if we're going to have a quorum. I think that January discussion will be important. So hopefully everyone can make it. But we're going to start that budget discussion unless we hear from members of the advisory board that we probably won't have a quorum. So we intend on having maybe July might be the only meeting in the next calendar year that can be canceled. But otherwise, all the other meetings we anticipate to have.
Okay, we have 7 here today. Why don't we just real quickly, is everyone here on January 4th? Everyone can, yep. Thank you, Justin, John.
Okay.
Jason, Mark.
Likely, not certain.
I'm sorry, Mark, say it again.
Likely, but not certain. I'm going away, not sure when I'm coming back.
That sounds almost ominous a little bit.
Yeah, that did, didn't it? Yeah.
Or fun, one or the other.
Yeah. Ashley, are you available?
Yeah, I should
Ashley's here. Great.
attend
Hi,
that.
Ashley.
Yeah, hi, sorry, different location today, a little unplanned. Yeah, I should be able to attend the January.
Okay. Well, with Mark's ominous, maybe not. I'm not sure what's happening. At least we would have a quorum with the remaining 6, and then hopefully we can get Tom and who is it, Samantha also.
Samantha, yep.
And so we'll go from there. Okay, well then, perfect. We'll move forward with it.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, with that, anything else for the good of the order? All right. Well, with that, Merry Christmas, everybody. It's going to be, I love this time of year personally, so I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and we will speak with you all in the new year.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Have a great
See
day.
you guys.